Hello. Oh, wow, this is so I'm going to call the meeting to order. We've got everything mic'd today because we're recording the meeting. So when people come up to speak or give us comment, we're going to ask that you do come up to the podium here so that we can record what you have to say. We really want to hear everything that everybody has to say. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the Housing Commission monthly meeting, and I'm going to start with roll call. So, down here, just go ahead and just call your name.
Juliana Doddick.
Karen Grove.
Nevada Merriman.
What was your title? We're all commissioners on the Housing Commission, and I'm Meg McGraw-Shear. So the first item on the agenda is public comment, but this is public comment that has to do with anything that's not on the agenda. So if you're here in regards to the draft ordinance, that's going to be in the next couple items. So what we're asking now is if anyone's here to provide comment for anything that's not included on the agenda. Is there anybody? Okay. All right, we have two items, and then we're going to move right into the main reason, the main topic of the meeting. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and ask for a motion to approve the minutes from the Housing Commission meeting of August 8th. Karen, okay. Do you have a second motion? I can second the motion. Okay, all in favor? Aye. All those not in favor? Okay, thank you. Okay, and then the next item is the update and quarterly report from Hello Housing. This is just an update, and so I thought what I would do to try to move things along is just see if any of the commissioners have any questions about the report, and we can do it that way. There's no need to ask for a presentation at this point. Okay. Nevada? No? This is the easiest report you guys have ever had to do. We're all good. Thank you so much. Okay, great. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move into the meat of the meeting here. We're here to gather public input on the draft tenant relocation ordinance, and I want to thank all of you so much for coming here to give us your comments. I think we're going to start with a staff presentation, and then we'll move into comments. Is that right? Okay.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Clay Curtin. I'm the Interim Housing and Economic Development Manager for the City of Menlo Park. And tonight, I just want to give a brief overview of the information that was in the staff report and to highlight some of the key provisions of the draft ordinance that has been created by the Commission. And then we'll open up for questions and also public comment. Okay. Sure. So if anyone has not yet filled out a card but would like to speak, please grab a card from the table over there, fill it out, and bring it up to the chair so that she can call you later and get your comment recorded. So real quickly, I just have a few slides to talk about the key points. This topic of rental relocation assistance has been on the radar of the city for about a year and a half. The City Council hosted a study session on displacement and concerns relating to some of our housing policies in January of 2017. Over the next several months, the Commission worked to prioritize a list of enhanced housing priorities and housing policies that we have been working on, one of which is tenant relocation assistance. The City Council met on August 22nd, 2017 to approve that list. And again, relocation assistance was one of the Group 1 priorities. They split this list of 17 items that had to do with housing policy into 3 priority groups. Relocation assistance was part of Group 1. In July, the Housing Commission started talking about this issue in earnest and reviewed the first draft that was created by staff. And then in our meeting last month, the Commission requested several changes and enhancements to the ordinance. That draft is what is attached to tonight's staff report and is linked on our project page at menlopark.org/relocation assistance. And it is what is the subject of the meetings tonight, and then also tomorrow. We'll be doing this again at the City Council chambers on the Burgess campus at the same time, 6:30 p.m. So the purpose of this ordinance and the purpose of relocation assistance is to provide a safety net for those who find themselves suddenly displaced. Oftentimes, sudden or unexpected displacement, being moved out of your home, causes short-term homelessness, and our goal is to minimize the type of disruption caused by those situations by requiring this assistance that will help ease some of the financial burden and take the pressure off an individual who suddenly finds themselves needing to find new housing. This money can be used for first and last month rent, security deposits, and related expenses that come from having to suddenly find a new home. It also helps preserve community and preserve neighborhoods and schools, because if a child is suddenly moved into a new living situation, they may end up having to change schools, and it can be quite disruptive. We'll go through some of the key provisions, the first of which was the Commission has asked that the city consider this ordinance on an urgency basis. And what that means is most ordinances approved by the City Council require a first reading, a second reading, and they become law after 30 days. An urgency ordinance takes effect immediately and is typically used to preserve public peace, health, or safety. And in order to do this, it requires the City Council to approve it with a 4/5 majority, so kind of a supermajority, and it requires them to provide a finding and a declaration of facts that support the case for this being an urgency item. Even when they do that in these situations, the urgency findings can still be challenged. So typically what happens and what we will do is we'll adopt both an urgency ordinance and a regular ordinance at the same time, so that if the urgency ordinance fails or is challenged, we will still be able to enact the policy that they want to approve in as quick a manner as possible. Another definition that's key in the ordinance is what is an eligible tenant. In this draft ordinance, the language calls for a tenant to have lived in a unit for 12 months or more. It was a year or so ago that the city implemented a 12-month lease option ordinance that requires landlords to give tenants a 12-month lease option. Now, that doesn't mean they have to accept a 12-month lease, but if you're going to offer a lease, you need to at least include the option for 12 months. And this aligns with that, so that at the end of your lease, you will have qualified for this ordinance here. As part of its discussion in January 2017, the City Council asked that this proposal include a means test, which includes it's an income limit. This draft, the Commission has asked for the limit to be set at 200% of the area median income. That number is derived from state and federal numbers and then published by the state of California in a table. The numbers on the screen and in the staff report are from the 2018 income limits. It lists the area median income for a single person at $82,900, and for a four-person household, the median household income would then be $118,400. If you look at the far right column, you'll see the income limits that are proposed in this ordinance. So it would basically apply to any household with that income limit or lower. Another part of the discussion when talking about how much should rent be and how much should this income limit be, the federal government publishes a rent burden guideline that advises that people should not pay more than 30% of their household income as rent. So what this chart does is looks at, based on the income limit for the various categories that are included on the income limit tables, everything from extremely low income, median income, up to the published moderate income, and then the numbers that we're considering. It shows what the 30% of that number is on a monthly basis. And then I've stuck in the number that comes from the average monthly Menlo Park rent for a 2-bedroom apartment. And this was taken over a 4-year period from September 2015 to September 2018. So I'm sure it definitely varied during that time frame, but this is an average. And then this shows the difference. So an extremely low-income person would be about $2,500 below what is needed to pay for a 2-bedroom apartment on a monthly basis. So that's just to kind of help feed the conversation. This chart here, I believe, references statewide numbers, but it's meant to kind of draw attention to what do certain types of jobs make. And so you can see that teachers average about $4,400 a month. They would be struggling to have a 2-bedroom apartment based on these numbers. The next definition in the ordinance that is important is talking about landlord caused termination. The ordinance calls out specifically significant rent increases, which, if enacted by a landlord on a tenant, would cause them to not be able to afford the rent, and therefore would cause them to move out and be displaced. The formula that the commission has built into this current draft calls for a number that is it's equal to the previous year's consumer price index plus 5%. The consumer price index is published by the federal government every month, and it's used to adjust contracts and purchase agreements in a wide range of items. It's essentially the cost of living increase or the rate of inflation that affects consumer pricing. Right now, with the CPI at around 2 or 3%, well, almost 4, it means that this rent increase limit would be about 8 or 9% without triggering the ordinance. Anything over that would likely cause the ordinance to be triggered. Landlord caused termination includes almost any other landlord-tenant issue as well. A couple of exceptions are if a tenant fails to pay rent, if the tenant is in breach of the rental agreement, or continues to commit or permit a nuisance in the rental unit. Those are reasons that they can be evicted without triggering this ordinance. And at the last monthly meeting, the commission also included an owner move-in or an owner use provision that would allow a landlord who was using a rental, had this property as a rental, but now is facing their own financial challenges and needs to move into their property as their primary residence, either themselves or their immediate family. That is also exempted, and in that situation, they would not have to pay relocation assistance. The caveat on that is they would have to stay in the unit for a minimum of 12 months, so they can't move in for just 2 or 3 months and then not have to pay. They'd have to live there for 12 months or more. The rental units that are included in this draft are basically any housing unit in Menlo Park, including apartments, condos, duplexes, single-family homes, almost any unit at all, with a few exceptions that are related to already affordable and income-limited units, such as in a specific affordable housing development. Those are already limited and deed restricted. It also does not apply to secondary dwelling units, also known as granny units or in-law units. Those are not covered in this ordinance. And rooms rented if a owner lives in their house and they rent out a room to a tenant, that also is not included, because in all of these in the last two instances, we did not want to have someone who is renting a room or a unit in their backyard, and let's say they have a bad relationship with that tenant. They live so close together, you don't want to be forced to have to keep a tenant that's not working out if you're going to be penalized by paying rental assistance that would also burden you. So the proposed rental relocation assistance amount is equal to 3 months of market rate rent, and that number would be published by the city on an annual basis. We would hire a consultant to calculate what is the market rate rent average for the citywide housing stock, and then that would be the amount multiplied by 3 in most situations. It would also include a 60-day subscription to a rental agency service. This is meant to help a tenant find their next place to live if they are displaced. And then the commission added the special circumstance household, which would receive 1 extra month of the market rate rent. And these households are defined as those with at least one household member who qualifies as elderly, disabled, or if there's a minor child in the home. And so now I will give it back to the chair, and we can open up for public comment, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and start with the public comment. So I'm going to just call people in the order of the cards that were received. And just a reminder, if you would like to provide us with comment, the cards are over there, and you can just bring them over here to Michael, and he'll pass them on to me. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, one more thing. I passed out to the commission a stack here of comments that were emailed or letters received by the city. So this will be attached to the minutes of this meeting, as well as any others that came in kind of late in the day, and that will become part of the public record in addition to all the public speakers here tonight and tomorrow night.
Thank you. Okay. So our first speaker is Dawson Coblin, and again, we're going to ask that people come up here to the podium so that we can record what you have to say. Hi, thank you.
Where this goes. So I represent a small section of the landlording population. Oh, I represent I am a landlord for a single home rental. So that's a particular area of the rental market that I see some issues with this ordinance. Oh. Okay. I'm obviously not a public speaker in the normal sense. Okay. So I'll try again. So you got the first part that I said. So I think I have a number of questions, and I don't want to take up all of your time. So I'll try to restrict it to a few key areas. The biggest concern I have with the ordinance, other than the fact that the card that I got was the first evidence I had of anything happening. Yet this is an urgent ordinance. So the two groups that are going to be affected most are the landlords, and the big landlords probably are tuned into this. Little landlords like me, I just found out about this. Okay, so that's a concern. there's a similar situation that happened in Palo Alto where, of course, that ordinance was passed, but got lots of coverage. So this is something for the small landlords, and I don't know the population of that in Menlo Park. They really need to be notified and their concerns pulled in. So most of my concerns have to do with the process for implementing this. So two questions. So it's just kind of a give and take. Looking from the landlord's point of view, the key thing has to do with landlord cause termination. And two of the items that are not in that category are breach of rental agreement and nuisance. Sounds easy. Now, but you have to think about scenarios. I mean, I've been a landlord for over 40 years, so I have seen a lot of different situations. First of all, breach of rental agreement, if you get to that particular point where a landlord is the landlord can only execute in Menlo Park at the present time, my understanding is the landlord can either do an eviction, because the tenant violated, or the landlord claims that the tenant violated the lease, or the landlord at the end of the lease currently can not renew because of this concern. Now, under this situation, it would seem like, are you leaving the implementation, the decision of whether there was in fact a breach, to the courts? Is that your plan? That's a somewhat rhetorical question. In other words, if you say that the breach or nuisance are two bases where this allocation is not required, it sounds like you're leaving that adjudication to the courts. But that wasn't made clear anywhere. Otherwise, in other jurisdictions, they have rent control boards where these things come up. But the landlord doesn't know when he's stepping into this, he's going to be faced potentially with an eviction, and if he's not successful, the eviction stops, but and he can't, if the eviction doesn't occur, he can't remove the tenant, right? Because he has a lease. It has to have a lease in Menlo Park. And so you kind of left the landlord in a catch-22 situation. Basically, all you've said is that if there is a breach of the lease, that the landlord isn't required to do the allocation. The courts have already decided that there was a breach of the lease. So it seems to me like if that either you're leaving the landlord hanging, or this is just a perfunctory topic, and I can't tell what your intent was here. So if someone wants to address that, please do. Otherwise, I have one other question. Okay. So the other question is an implementation question, and it has to do with the procedure for reallocation. Let's assume that a landlord decides to not renew the lease. He can only do that at the end of the lease. Okay, we're not talking about a breach of rental agreement. Therefore, the landlord has no choice but to wait until the end of the lease. Lease theoretically has a term, but with this situation, the idea of a term of a lease goes away. It means nothing, because in essence, you're requiring the landlord to renew the lease continually. When the lease is up, the end of the one-year lease, the landlord cannot not renew the lease under this rule. That's what this is, really. So, unless they want to face this reallocation, correct? Did I miss something here?
Sorry, we're not going to have a dialogue back and forth with every speaker.
Okay.
So I will address all the questions and comments.
not discussion.
Yeah, I'll address all the questions at the end.
Okay, all right. So I'm presuming the scenario I'm thinking of is, for one reason or another, I can think of several actually, having done landlording for a while, that the landlord chooses not to renew the lease. Had nothing to do with raising the rent. Okay? So the landlord decides to go ahead and accept the reallocation allowance payment. Your implementation says that the first thing happens after the landlord provides this notice is that half of the total allocation, in this case it could be as much as 2 months' rent, is paid directly to the tenant. Okay? And then we wait. And then you have the situation, if the tenant does not move out, which can very well happen, okay, that the tenant is required to reimburse the landlord. Except the tenant chooses not to reimburse the landlord. So your implementation here says, okay, in that case, where the tenant has accepted the 2 months payment, has not moved out, has no intention of moving out, said they were going to, but chooses not to, that the landlord has the ability to get a judgment for money. My experience with this, and if you stop and think about it, I think anybody with half a brain would see that if you've gotten into this situation, the tenant, if the tenant doesn't move out, the tenant is not going to have the money or have already spent that money on something else, and you leave the landlord with no option because you do not allow the landlord to evict. The way this is written, if the landlord pays the money to the tenant, 2 months' rent, which could be, we've seen numbers of $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 for half of this allocation payment, the tenant does not move out, the landlord is stuck. He can't evict because he's, in other words, there's nothing he can do. This has nothing to do with your allocation. It's the way this thing is written. So the problem here is that what should happen, I think, is you should consider a modification of that clause. What happens with respect to a tenant not moving out after having accepted the 2 months payment, or the half payment, releasing the landlord to being able to evict the tenant. If the landlord in this situation, for whatever reason might be, has chosen to go ahead and pay, wants to pay the money, perfectly happy to pay the money, he wants possession, this ordinance does not allow that. And there's no way to get the tenant out that I can see. Because he has to, I'm trying to understand. It's probably a case of my not fully understanding your ordinance. But that's a case that is of interest to me. How does that work? If the tenant simply refuses to pay the money, can the landlord now evict the tenant? I don't know. That's what I'm trying to understand. So I have many other questions, but those are the key ones. I'd ask you to think about the situation, not of the multi-unit. Multi-unit is a very different kind of situation, of the individual house and home situation. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is, and I'm sorry, I might mispronounce the last name, it's Luis Carriel? Thank you.
Hello, good evening. Is that loud enough? Okay. I don't want to be too loud, but okay. All right. I'm with the, it's a small tenants union that we formed with some committee members here in Menlo Park with some apartments down the street on Pierce Road. I'm not sure if you guys were there on the last meeting or not that we had the city council, but I'd specified in my co-members to the reason we're supporting the tenants relocation assistance for the fact that we have a new landlord that came in to our apartment complex. He raised the rents from paying $1,300 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Now we'll be paying, or at least I will be paying, for a 2-bedroom apartment in Menlo Park, $2,500 by October 1st. That's quite a lot of money. The apartments are in a very good condition, the inside especially, and that's one of the reasons why I feel that we should support and we need to get this tenants agreement relocation system going on, because there is no other kind of assistance in Menlo Park for the tenants or for any renters. There's say just cause right now for any landlord to come in and be like, okay, well, here's your 30-day notice, you have to leave. And, paying that $2,500 right now starting October 1st, who knows how long I'm going to be able to stay there. You know, I've been a resident pretty much all my life here in Menlo Park, between Menlo Park and East Palo Alto. I've grown up. I've been in this area, and it's kind of hard leaving my steps here. You know, I attended Bellhaven School Elementary. I've been in East Palo Alto, Brown McNair, Brentwood School, all those schools. I grew up in these two areas, and I'm still here. Hopefully, I don't have to leave with this $2,500 rent that I have to pay now, but if I have no choice, I have to leave. Who knows where, maybe the valley or somewhere out there. But, you know, that's one of the reasons why we're here, and it's the reason why I would like to have, you know, support this law and hopefully see a big change in this renters just cause that Menlo Park doesn't have right now, currently. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, our next speaker is Sandra Zamora. Zamora.
Okay, I'm not good at speaking in public, but I'll do my best. My name is Sandra. I live in Menlo Park. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay. That's okay. Okay. So I got an $800 increase in rent in the last 6 months or so. We got the first increase for $400, and then after 60 days, we got another $400. I got shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money. So I started searching, and I tried to find out if this was actually legal. I didn't know anything about control or anything about rents. So we found the East Palo Alto Legal Services, and they provided us some information. And a piece of that information was that there is no rent control in Menlo Park at all, zero. So we started, trying to find out what can we do now, because we have an $800 increase, and some of my neighbors got 3 increases every 60 days for 3 times. They got like a $400 increase. Luis got 3 increases, I got 2. We're not the only ones. And like Luis said, our apartments were sold to other investors, and these investors gave us notices of increases slowly in segments. So by the time we got the notices, it was actually late to bring all these other tenants that actually were displaced already. So we are here, I'm here to let you know that every case is different, right? Every case has its own details to the situation. But for me, I work as a preschool teacher full-time. On weekends, I work another job, and now I have to do that 7 days a week so I can just gain enough to pay the rent. I'm not the only one in this situation. It's a lot of us. So I'm here because I feel like a lot of people that are here are also supporting this relocation assistance. That's going to help us, at least find another place. If not me, it can be someone else that can find a place to go. Ultimately, we don't want to leave the area. We all been living here for more than 10 years, living in the same units. I don't have kids, but a lot of my neighbors have kids, and they have their lives around. They have the schools here. They have teachers. They have friends. They have all the families around. So there is a lot of factors to consider. It's not just the fact that we are getting an increase, but we don't mind paying an increase, but it has to be a considerate amount. $800 in 4 months, it's extreme. So this is hurting us. Right now I have a job, but what about if I get into an accident? What about if I pile up bills? And that's gonna, put me on the verge of getting evicted because I might not have the money to pay the rent. I would like you to consider that this law that is in process, hopefully you have, that mentality of thinking that this is going to be helpful at the end, not just as an individual, but as a community. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Isabel Coronel. Isabel Coronel. Okay, hi. Sorry, I'm sure. Okay.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Isabel Coronel. Vengo aquí con ustedes porque a mí ahorita en lo personal me subieron $800 de renta. Sorry.
Hello, my name is Isabel, and today I'm here because. Hello, my name is Isabel, and today I'm here because I wanna let you know that I got an $800 increase as well.
Por esta es la razón que vengo a que pasen la ley de control de renta, porque no es justo. Yo soy de una familia de 4 personas, mi esposo, mi hijo, mi hija y yo, y con el incremento de renta, pues ya no puedo, mi esposo tuvo que buscar otro trabajo, yo estoy trabajando y la verdad no me alcanza el dinero.
We are a family of 4, and right now we all have to work, my husband and myself, and that's just barely enough to pay the rent.
Thank you.
She's also
Thank you.
supporting the tenant relocation assistance, and she would like you to, support it as well. Like I said earlier, ultimately we need rent control. This is just, I feel like it's just the door that is opening to probably eventually get to rent control. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Mark Nagler. Nagales, sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry? Over here. Yeah. I'm sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Mark Nagales. I work for Project Sentinel. I am the outreach coordinator, so I'm actually here a little bit different. I'm actually here to provide data in terms of Menlo Park residents. I actually was working for Congresswoman Jackie Spear for the last 10 years, so I'm kind of catching up to speed here. But a little bit about Project Sentinel. It was actually established in 1971, and we're funded through San Mateo County. We assist individuals with housing problems such as discrimination, rental issues, and provide dispute resolutions between landlords and tenants. Our case managers listen to housing problems and provide counseling for a landlord or tenant. The case manager will describe relevant laws, refer the landlord or tenant to appropriate services and resources, and offer dispute resolution options. It's important to know that Project Sentinel does not provide legal advice, and we remain neutral. Dispute resolutions is an effective, voluntary way to resolve conflicts. The case manager will actively encourage all callers to participate in out-of-court dispute resolution. The process may be done over the phone or face-to-face. Face-to-face mediation is facilitated through Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center. If a resolution is reached, the case manager or mediator will offer to provide a written agreement. Now let me talk about Menlo Park. In terms of Menlo Park, let me kind of talk about the data but not go into specifics about the case because of privacy issues. So for the fiscal year, which is from July to July, Project Sentinels received over 1,900 calls, but out of those 1,900 calls, only 51 calls came from Menlo Park. The majority of the calls were from tenants. The majority of calls from Menlo Park dealt mostly with deposit issues. A landlord must, within 21 days after the tenant vacates the property, mail the tenant a refund of their deposit, or if the deposit is not completely refunded, a written itemized note has to be provided as to what was used in terms of back rent, cost of cleaning and repairs. Typically, these calls deals with disagreements about how much the security deposit has been returned to the tenant. The landlord could argue that certain repairs or cleaning are needed to be done to the unit, so a portion of the security deposit has to be used to cover the costs. The second largest volume of calls we receive are maintenance and repair calls. Under California law, all residential leases and rental agreements contain an implied warranty of habitability. The landlord is responsible for repairing and maintaining a rental unit in a habitable condition and must ensure that rental units comply with state and local building and health codes. But also, it's also the responsibility of the tenant to make sure that the unit is in concurrent in terms of basically meaning that it's livable and it's up to code in terms of what their landlord wants. Now, a tenant could call Project Sentinel and say that they believe their landlord is being retaliatory towards them because of the requested repairs or other issues. Since we don't provide legal advice, we would then refer them to the Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County. I also did want to make a point that Project Sentinel does have a fair housing department. If someone believes that they're being discriminated against because of marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, ancestry, age, or source of income, they should call Project Sentinel. These are what we call protected characteristics, and our Fair Housing Department can investigate. Finally, the third largest type of calls we get are what someone mentioned earlier, the 30, 60, 90-day terminations notices. Under California law, a landlord can terminate a month-to-month tenancy by serving a 30-day written notice if the tenancy lasted less than 1 year or less, or a 60-day notice if the tenancy has lasted more than a year. If you're on Section 8, then you receive a 90-day notice. In terms of a typical 1-year lease, it terminates when your term expires. However, if the tenant holds over by staying after the expiration date with the landlord's permission, but without signing a new lease, the tenancy automatically converts to month-to-month. From the data that I reviewed, Menlo Park callers were asking basic questions about the type of notice that they're receiving. Was it appropriate for the tenant to receive a 30-day notice? Or were they supposed to receive a 60-day notice? Now, in terms of rent increases, we only received 2 calls. Again, without going into the specifics about the calls, the basic question could be that the caller has been renting for over a year and just converted to month-to-month. The person's rent has been increased twice within the last 6 months. Project Sentinel would provide information that it's within the landlord's legal right to increase the rent as many times within a year if the person was month-to-month. However, the landlord must give a 30-day written notice if the rent is increasing 10% or less. If the rent increase is 10% or more, then the landlord must give a 60-day notice. Now, a landlord can issue a 3-day notice, for example, if the tenant does not pay the rent. If a tenant is having an issue with a landlord in some sort of mediation, the tenant should continue to pay the rent. Now, according to the data, we did receive 1 call regarding an eviction notice. For any caller that receives an eviction notice, we provide information on what the process looks like and recommend that they contact legal aid. So that's kind of the data that I have. I wanted to share that because we were asked. Being that I'm the new outreach coordinator, I want to make sure that you know that who we are. We are here to help both landlords and tenants in terms of questions you might have. And I did leave a pamphlet here on the table if you have any questions about your situation. And I recommend that if you do have any questions, to call our hotline, which is 650-399-2149. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Keith Ogden.
Thank you, City of Menlo Park and the Housing Commission. Can you all hear me? Great. For the opportunity to comment on the proposed tenant relocation assistance ordinance. I commend the city for initiating this process to gather public input. My name is Keith Ogden. I am a senior housing attorney at Community Legal Services in East Palo Alto. Homelessness, increased stress on low-income families, increased depression, worse health for parents and children. These are effects that we see at Community Legal Services in clients that are facing the prospect or who have dealt with displacement. These all have in common that they are results of displacement of families losing housing. Excellent sources are available on these topics, including the National Healthcare for Homeless Council's Homelessness and Health, What's the Connection? In addition, Evictions, Fallout, Housing, Hardship, and Health by Matthew Desmond and Rachel Tolbert Kimbrough, and there are other resources as well. that really spell out the connection between displacement, housing instability, and health. The ordinance before the city that's being discussed here is not the be-all, end-all when it comes to these issues. There are, and we've heard some speakers talk about this, stronger tenant protections available. Cities like San Jose and Mountain View have recently adopted those. In Mountain View, landlords cannot issue an $800 or $1,000 rent increase because of the rent control law that was passed there in 2016. To be clear, this ordinance that's proposed is not rent control. But that said, it would do two things, and I think the staff report spelled these out, but just to sort of emphasize these. First, it can mitigate the impacts of displacement by providing families with assistance to help them with a soft landing as they transition to new housing. It will also reduce this will reduce the incidence of homelessness for low-income families who suffer traumatic rent increases or no-fault evictions. We did a study along with Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County, tracing evictions in San Mateo Court, gathering data, doing surveys on people that had gone through the eviction process, and that survey process found that over 17% of families who had gone through the eviction process in court found that they were homeless for some period after the eviction process. Displacement can have the same impact whether or not the eviction process is utilized. Second, this ordinance may prevent displacement in the first instance and the negative impacts associated with it. I would like to commend also the city's embarked on several months now of really rigorous process to both explore on the city staff level, at the Housing Commission level, to gather information, to present it to the public. Now this is the second time. Tomorrow night will be the third time in a really fleshed out fashion, an ordinance that people can respond to and react to. And as they've gone along, there have been changes that have been made, and I commend the city and the Housing Commission for doing that too. And for example, the city staff member Clay Curtin mentioned that the owner move-in portion that was added after the last meeting. In addition, because the ordinance would apply to all families and individuals earning at or below 200% AMI, it should avoid the unintended effect of some landlords not renting to lower income families. So these are a few examples of the thought that's been put into this ordinance to date, and that continues to be put into it as it's developed. Regarding concerns that the ordinance would run afoul of a state law called Costa-Hawkins, at first I would submit that the law is not rent control. It doesn't tell owners what they can and cannot do in terms of setting rents. And second, it's not punitive. It's intended to prevent landlords from passing on to the city and to social service agencies the real costs associated with homelessness and relocation, and instead having landlords bear some of those costs themselves. The city should certainly continue to study this on their own, and I hope they would do so with these arguments in mind. I also want to just take a moment to commend the city for creating more affordable housing, specifically with the 1300 Willow development that was redeveloped for more units, increase in affordable housing units. However, I think that we all know that it's difficult to find affordable housing. There simply isn't enough, both in Menlo Park and the region. And affordable housing takes time. It takes time to get approved, for plans, to be built, and then for people to be housed. This matter is much more urgent. Tenant relocation assistance isn't perfect. As I said before, it's going to mitigate the effects of homelessness, and in some instances, it will prevent displacement. So it's my hope that the City Council and other stakeholders will take the time tonight, tomorrow night, and in the near future to listen to the families and individuals most impacted by the housing crisis. Pay attention to those voices that we've heard from tenants who have been severely impacted as you're considering all the different voices and making a decision to increase local tenant protections by adopting the tenant relocation assistance ordinance in its current form with modifications that are reasonable given the input from folks. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Okay, our next speaker is Latrice Taylor.
Good evening. I'm Latrice Taylor. I'm the Associate Director of Programs and Services with Samaritan House. We are new to the community, but we wanted to be here and be in partnership with the community. We have been around for 45 years as the Emergency Safety Net Service Agency in San Mateo, but as of July 2nd, we are here in Menlo Park serving community members just like you who may need help with emergency services. And if that looks like financial assistance, rent, deposit, utilities, medical equipment, we're here to help you. If it's food, whatever that may look like, even if it's just information and referral services, that's what we're here to do. We wanted to learn more about what is affecting this community, and we're here to support the community and hear what it is that's affecting you and that would help to make your lives be different and help you to be self-sustaining and move forward to be productive. We've left our own flyers here as well, so if anyone has interest in just knowing more about who we are, or if you're just seeking help, if you don't even know where to turn, if you're facing eviction, if your water is being turned off, if you don't have lights tonight, if it is just about shelter, whatever that may look like, please give us a call. We're contracted by the county to serve you. And so we're hoping that if you need us, you call on us. If you have questions about how you can move forward with your life or how we can best help you, that's what Samaritan House is here to do just for this community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, so our next speaker is Owen Lewis.
Adjust this a little bit. Can everyone hear me? Yep. All right. Thank you, everyone, for giving us the opportunity to talk about this important program tonight. My name is Owen Lewis. I'm here representing the California Apartments Association, the Tri-County Division, which represents about 3,000 local apartment owners and property managers here. I know my organization was proud to be one of the leaders on the task force on that January 10th, 2017 meeting that established a direction for Menlo Park to explore this renter-tenant relocation assistance program. However, the ordinance that we see today, we have a couple reservations with. The first is, after watching the video of the City Council meeting on January 10th, 2017, the City Council did urge the staff to explore renter relocation payments for units that had been taken off the market due to renovation or change of use. However, nowhere in the video did it say that such relocation payments should be awarded or triggered based on rent increases. So that's where we see some problems with this ordinance. And the reason is because once you put in place ordinances that limit the ability of housing providers to set their own rents, you're talking about a form of rent control. And I agree with the former speaker who was up here. I don't know if she's still here tonight, but this is, in fact, opening the door to rent control. And when you use the landlord cause termination programs, that rings the bell of just cause evictions as well. The reason that this is a bit contentious and divisive is if you look at what's happened in our county in the past 4 years. Rent control has come to San Mateo County cities 4 times in the past 3 years. Belmont, San Carlos, Pacifica, San Mateo. It was voted down by the voters all 4 times. So when we're talking about taking those steps, which are very, very divisive and contentious steps, I think, and when you do that without the City Council's direct approval, that's when we need to probably take a step and think about deliberation. The second issue that we have with this ordinance is the 200% area median income threshold for means testing. I think that we all agree that we want to help the lower income people. I think everyone in this room is on that same page. But when we talk about the service employees and the teachers that we want to help, I'm curious how we got to that number of 200% AMI. If the chart up there earlier, I think the number was $165,000. I live at home with my parents, and if I was making $165,000, I'd probably be Tesla shopping. But in this case, I think that we need to revise that number to more accurately reflect the people that we want to help in terms of this policy. So I want to also congratulate, like the previous speaker did, Menlo Park's insistence on building more housing. I think we all agree that's the true solution to stabilizing the market and providing affordable rents. And I think there are other pragmatic solutions as well. When I was walking in on that table, I was looking at this home sharing program that we have. I think this is a terrifically pragmatic solution where we can find seniors or someone who perhaps has had a spouse pass away and living in a home with 4 bedrooms, and we can find them a safe roommate. That's a very pragmatic solution that I think we can take without hurting the people that are providing housing and really pitting Menlo Park's community against each other. If you look at these other cities that have rent control and you go to the city council meetings, you really see that going down this path of rent control pits neighbor against neighbor and landlord against tenant and creates a lot of animosity in our community. And I don't think that's what Menlo Park wants. And I think we should go back to the city council and let them take the proper steps to discuss this amongst themselves before encouraging them to go down a path of rent trigger-based relocation assistance programs. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Courtney Powell.
Good evening, everyone. Housing Commission. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak tonight on this ordinance. It's been a long time coming. We've had these discussions for the summer, and it's really exciting to see everyone in the room now to have this discussion. I want to speak in support of the ordinances before us, and I want to talk kind of about 3 unique points. The first is just a really broad brush picture of what this means to me. When I look at this ordinance, I see it as something that's really about homelessness prevention. It's about making sure that people who no longer are able to stay in the place they're at are able to land back on their feet again once they are kicked out of an apartment. It's about making sure that we keep our communities together, that we can keep kids in school here, that we can make sure that people are not left wandering around, not left, sleeping in their cars in that transition period from one place to another. I think that some provisions of this ordinance really clarify that that's what it's about. One thing that hasn't been mentioned tonight is the possibility of a 60-day subscription service to an agency that will help you find a new place to live in Menlo Park to keep you in the community. And I think that when we look at the ordinance as a whole, this is really about keeping our community together. It's really about homelessness prevention, and that's the reason I'm strongly behind it. I also wanted to talk to the point about 200% of the AMI, because I think when we look at that number, we're thinking about, that is not necessarily someone who's at the moderate income level. I think that when I look at this, though, I want to make sure that this ordinance helps everyone who it possibly can. And I know that, rents are so out of control here that, if there is someone who's in that moderate income category who's struggling to put down, a security deposit and also make their first month's rent and maybe has to go out of their means a little bit just to stay in the area, then yeah, I want them to be able to get the assistance so that they don't have to move far away, so that they don't have to, stay somewhere temporary, live on a couch or in a car during the time in which they're moving from place to place. And so I want to encourage the Housing Commission to actually, make sure that this is as flexible as possible, make sure that we do ensure that this actually helps everyone who might be faced under these circumstances, and also make sure that it most of all helps the people who are going to be in this situation the most, which are lower income tenants. The final point that I want to make is just about the urgency aspect of this. I think that we have seen a lot of data and we've seen a lot of personal stories that talk about how this is a problem in Menlo Park. And I think that, in my opinion, just, one person is like too many to lose from our community. And I want to, I know that that's also not a one-person problem, right? It's a ton of people who are experiencing this. And so I want to thank all the people who are providing services who came out tonight, because it's been really informative for me to just learn about what the options are available. And I want to, once again, urge the Housing Commission, go full speed ahead on this one, because I think it's really important. So thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jeff Dang.
Hey, good evening, everyone. So I represent myself, a happy Menlo Park resident, and I'm not a landlord, but I'm actually happy to share my humble opinions. So first of all, thanks a lot for coming with this audience. I think I totally agree that we need to work together to actually keep our community together, and even better maybe in the future. So, but by just reading this ordinance, so I think I have the feeling that there seems like there are some a key assumption from this proposal. So first of all, this one seems to assume that renters need help while landlords do not. Also, this seems to assume that renters has financial burdens, but where landlords do not. Right? This seems to be is always assume landlord as the guy that actually very greedy, try to push out the existing renter and get a new tenant to increase the price. But as a matter of fact, I know some of the actually landlords, actually they are very hard-working professionals, saving every penny they have, and actually they'll, for example, they rely on the rent to actually pay for their children's, their kids' tuitions, and some of them actually rely on the rent to actually for their retirement fund. Some of them need the money to take care of their parents, their kids. But I didn't seem to see those kind of conditions be reflected in this proposal. So also, I also know that actually even some actually renters actually they probably have even more money. They have much more money than actually the landlords. They just choose to live as a renter because that's their choice. They actually instead they actually invest in other things like stock, maybe like a mutual fund, whatever. And I think the landlord choose to actually investment in the property. But why there's no protection for them, right? For example, if the renter gave a notice, say, hey, I'm going to move out next month. What if the landlord cannot find a new tenant that pay the same amount of rent? Are there any protection for landlords? Why we only see what constraints for the landlord from this proposal? Nothing for that's no protection for the landlord. Also think about, what if the landlord has no money to pay the property tax? What if they don't have the money to pay for their maybe their mortgage? Their property will be taken away from them, right? They may not have the money to pay for their kids' tuition. So I strongly suggest we actually adding more protection in the same ordinance to this ordinance, so that we can together we have a binding for renter and also for landlord, so that we can together can make this community even better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. One thing is I want to also mention is that I also know that people are just assume landlord is just something they connect money, but in no cases landlord was actually facing a very different types of like a risk. For example, they could be sued by their the renter. They could have lost their home. They could have paid a lot of like attorney fees. So I think a landlord actually is actually take a lot of risk to able to keep a property and to be able to connect the rent. And we should definitely also add protection for landlord as well, especially those kind of small ones.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Shirley Gibson.
Thank you, Housing Commission, and all of the Menlo Park folk who are here today. I'm a directing attorney with Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County, and since as a housing attorney, I have sort of a unique bird's eye view of the housing crisis and the tenants who are in the peril that we are attempting to address with this ordinance. I wanted to share with you some observations on the current state of things, as well as some data that I think is informative to sort of the priorities in this ordinance. And I'm going to figure out how to use this. Oh, okay. There we go. All right. So currently, the state of affairs is that month-to-month tenancies can be terminated very quickly with any type of no-cause or no-fault eviction that only needs to be 30 to 60 days in duration, depending on how long the tenant has been there. Likewise, rent increases of any amount, unregulated, can be implemented on a maximum of 60 days notice. So change can be foisted upon a tenant very, very quickly. And tenants, in our experience at Legal Aid, the tenants that we encounter, are unable to accommodate these rapid demands for higher rent or for vacating the premises, so they're frequently not within compliance of those 30 or 60-day demands, which lands them in my office. So when a landlord files an eviction lawsuit, what's called an unlawful detainer, it's often because the tenant simply couldn't get out fast enough or couldn't pay that increased rent demands. This is what we call a lose-lose situation, because when the landlord has to file an unlawful detainer, they're going to court, they're paying a filing fee at court, oftentimes they're hiring an attorney or at least some sort of paralegal to help them do that. And in our experience, that cost can range from a minimum of $400 up to maybe $1,800 if they're getting one of the usual landlord attorneys in the county. Meanwhile, the tenant has a lawsuit to deal with on top of the demands of the landlord. 35% of the tenants in this county actually fail to respond and defend themselves in court. Sadly, those folks will default. They'll get an eviction on their record. Their credit history will be impacted, and they will have an even harder time moving because of those factors. 65% of tenants in the county actually do make it into court, thankfully, because there are agencies like Project Sentinel and Community Legal Services and Legal Aid Society trying to help people do that. And so when tenants respond to an unlawful detainer in court, what it means is that the landlord's putting resources into being in court, these legal services agencies are putting resources into being in court, and ultimately what ends up happening is a negotiated exit in most of those instances. So we put a lot of resources into accomplishing an objective that maybe we could just do by ordinance. So currently, the displacement impacts when all of this comes to pass is that people leave the area. There was a study that Keith referenced by the Urban Displacement Project that showed at least 1 in 4 tenants ended up basically moving out of the county, more than 25 miles away from their current residence. So when Menlo Park sees this level of rent increase, eviction activity, they are literally losing residents. People are not moving down the block. More often than not, they are actually leaving the area. Maybe commuting back to their same job, maybe bringing their kids back to the same school, but very often a loss to the community. A significant percentage of the folks in this sample reported homelessness within the survey period, but as we have seen, the longer in time you go out, that homelessness factor becomes more and more frequently appearing. So that, I would say, is definitely an underrepresentation because it's just a snapshot in time right after eviction. The displacement impact socially, economically, and sort of environmentally in the community are well documented in a host of studies. But the choices that tenants are forced to make at that point involve compromises on where they live, living in crowded or substandard conditions because that's where they can go, that's what they can access. They're in areas of much less opportunity in terms of schools, services, environmental health, transit options, and the trauma to a family or individual that experiences displacement can last for years in terms of depression, poor health, stress levels, academic performance by children. And this is a link to the very same study that Keith cited by Matthew Desmond. Rent burdens in the community. We have just a very recent study came out by Zillow, which shockingly found that based on a San Jose sampling, the lowest income population that supposedly would be accessing the lowest cost housing is actually rent burdened at a rate of 99%, meaning they literally can only live in a household situation where they're spending 100% of their rent or 100% of their income, or they're engaging in those same kinds of compromises of overcrowding, substandard housing, accessing the less desirable housing. But we know countywide, amongst all renters of all income levels, there's still a rent burden. At least 52% of people spend more than 30% of their income on rent. So what does that mean? A high rent burden means that while all those resources are going to the existing tenancy, nobody's saving because it's impossible to do that. And so when that 60-day notice comes, when that rent increase comes, there's no malleability of the financial circumstance. There's no extra sitting around to finance that move. And that's why mitigation, like this relocation ordinance, makes a tremendous difference because it fills that gap that tenants' own savings simply cannot. It also means that prospective landlords are unlikely to rent to that tenant an identically priced unit, because most landlords are going to screen their tenants for financial eligibility, and they're not going to take a financial risk on someone who's spending 99% of their income on the rent. That wouldn't be good business. They're going to have some kind of multiplier, typically, of you need to make at least twice the rent, at least 3 times the rent in some instance, to not pose a financial risk to the landlord. So tenants who are moving out of a high rent burden situation are not likely to be able to find an identical match in terms of similar unit within the area that's identically priced. And that's an important factor to understand as we look at the lack of affordable housing stock being a component of this. No fault evictions are the very narrow circumstance that we're looking at in this ordinance, but I just wanted to put that in context because a couple of people have commented on, well, what about the breach of lease situation? What about the non-payment of rent situation? That is actually a lesser occurrence in Menlo Park based on the data that we've collected over the years. This is a very common pattern, so I wouldn't say this is even just in recent years. And it mirrors all over the county. More than half of the evictions in the county are no-fault evictions, and really close to half, 46% of the evictions in Menlo Park are no-fault evictions, meaning there's no allegation that the tenant breached their lease, failed to pay rent, did something wrong that resulted in the termination. More often than not, it is a business-related decision on the part of the landlord. They are wanting to sell the house or the duplex or the building, and they can sell it for more money if it's vacant. They are wanting to rehab the entirety of the building and renovate the units and make them nicer and rent them out for more rent. Those are very common examples, investor expectation sorts of reasons why a landlord would want a unit vacant that have to do with an economic calculus of how can we maximize the income from the building. Not illegal, but it doesn't factor in the impact on the tenant financially, and that's where this ordinance would, again, fill the gap. The fault-based allegations, the breach of lease that makes up this 21%, and non-payment of rent, which makes up 33%, would not enter into this particular ordinance. Those are separate kinds of cases. In terms of the demographic profile of who's evicted by that particular type of eviction pool, the no-fault evictions in Menlo Park, again, this very much mirrors what we see countywide. But particular to Menlo Park, 49% of the no-fault eviction households are households with kids. 48% are female head of household. 40% identify as Hispanic or Latino, which is sort of shocking when you consider how disproportionate that is to the Hispanic and Latino population of Menlo Park. It's about double. 25% have a head of household over the age of 62, and 11% have a disabled head of household. That does not capture how many have a disabled person in the household, but disabled head of household. So when you're looking at kind of those special circumstances factors of who would that extra month of relocation payment apply to, there is a not insignificant percentage of those no-fault eviction recipients who would need that and be entitled to it. One of the questions that the Housing Commission has posed is whether there's evidence to support this as an urgency ordinance, meaning if this is adopted, if there were a lag time before it became effective, would there be harm sufficient that we could point to say it should be immediately effective, or in some instances you can also justify making it retroactively effective. So I did my homework, Housing Commission, and looked at a couple of ordinances that were supported by findings passed by City of San Jose and Mountain View. And these were the types of things that they pointed to when they were determining that it supported an urgency finding. So the likelihood that tenants would receive a rent increase notice or eviction notice that wouldn't otherwise have occurred but for the publication of the proposed ordinance was the most commonly cited factor. In other words, we don't want to make the situation worse by engaging in these discussions, inciting sort of fear and insecurity in the minds of landlords who feel like they need to act preemptively and start issuing eviction notices to get ahead of a potential ordinance. But those very same fears frequently get articulated by landlords, and we can anticipate just on about 100 years of economic theory that people will act in their own self-interest and do that. So a rent increase notice issued preemptively is reasonably foreseeable under these circumstances. The other thing that cities have relied upon are actual increases in the rates of eviction notices and rent increase notices. That's harder to track in a smallish community because you're not going to have like huge amounts of statistical data. Our sample size is pretty small. As Project Sentinel cited, they had just maybe one. Community legal services likewise have had a handful of rent increase notices in recent months. And we at Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County have seen, yes, an increase, but a difference in like the monthly rates going from like 1 increase notice to 3 rent increase notices. So it's notable enough to support an urgency finding. I would leave to you and the city attorney. The current magnitude of the problem could also support a finding of urgency simply by saying it's enough of a crisis at the current rate of eviction, at the current rate of rent increases, and the harm to the people experiencing those is devastating enough to require sort of a preemptive move to say we have to curb that harm regardless of whether there's an increase in the rate. So there's good examples from San Jose and Mountain View. Happy to provide those. And then finally, one of the priorities I just want to highlight here is that we as a community in the county and the city of Menlo Park, we have this fair housing obligation that we do have to address, because if you look at the demographic profile of who's impacted here, it's not just a poverty issue, it's a race issue. It is an ethnicity issue. It is a families with kids issue. And we can't just shrug our shoulders and say, well, it's the market. What are you going to do? Because there is this legal obligation to affirmatively further fair housing. And so I would say policies such as these do need to act in combination to mitigate some of the things that were observable trends in our San Mateo County Assessment of Fair Housing that was adopted last year and includes Menlo Park. Because in Menlo Park, we have had a steady loss of low-income households since 2000. We've had almost half decline in 50% decline in the African American population since 2000, and a strongly disproportionate impact of displacement on families with children, African American households, and Hispanic and Latino tenants. So while this is a piece of the puzzle, I would say be bold and please don't stop here. Because part of what this assessment of fair housing found was that these impacts are largely the result of an investor-oriented housing market. And so part of what we're suffering from is this sort of insatiable appetite for real estate income that is, no one's fault, but is definitely the market culture. And the more rental housing that we can take off that plate and take out of those market forces, the better. So looking at some of the alternatives like the community land trust that is fledgling in East Palo Alto, so that we can just take that out of sort of the capitalist pressure, would be a great sort of collaborative investment with business partners and cities to acquire into a land trust some of these properties, permanently affordable housing. And so I urge the county to, and the city to proceed with these sorts of initiatives, but put them in a holistic wraparound model of affordable housing. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Pastor Baines.
Good evening, commissioners and community. I'm used to holding the mic, so. I want to commend you, commissioners, for even considering this TRC, and also encourage you and let you know I don't think it goes far enough, but it's a start, and you have to start with something. As a pastor who pastors many members, I have a congregation that I look out for spiritually as well as financially, relationally, and to hear the testimonies from those who have gone before me. I can't add anything on to what the facts already stated. The facts are the facts. Shirley Gibson, you just did an excellent job, so I'm not going to repeat that. But I also run a homeless shelter. And I see the very people of my community, members of our congregations and synagogues and temples, from Menlo Park, from East Palo Alto, in our shelter, people that I grew up with. There's people in this room that are members of my church that are losing their place of residency. Rent control under the leadership of William Webster and Mr. Jones back there from EPA Can Do started in 1985 in East Palo Alto. So rent control is successful. Even though you're not talking about that, rent control is something that if you really want to put some teeth into something, you want to establish that, but you need to do it in the right way. I'm sympathetic to property owners and understand they got to make a profit, and that's fine. I just believe they shouldn't try to make all the profits on the least of these, those that have the least amount. I don't think that's right. I think we're better than that, or we can be better than that. So I lost my house right over there on New Bridge to predatory lending. Made me sick, but I learned a lesson. And I said that I'll never ever lose another house And I'll never, ever let anybody I know who owns a house lose a house if I have anything to say about it. And will use my influence and connections to make sure that doesn't happen. So today, I encourage you, and I applaud you, and I also encourage you to seriously consider this to help the least of them. And then I also want to let you know that there are faith-based organizations and nonprofit organizations that are considering to also use their property to help build not just affordable housing, because to me affordable housing is relative who can afford it. And just like the man said who owned the property or represented the property, Owen, who represented those property owners, he lives with his mother and father. Well, today, a lot of people who are doubling up can't even stay in a home. And I want to say that the faith-based community is seriously considering to help create Eli housing, extremely low-income housing for the working poor, for most of the people that's probably in this room, and the homeless. That's where we can work on in the future. But today, they need to stay in their houses. And so if you can consider this, we all would be greatly appreciative of that. Thank you for your great work.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Nuriel Mogavian. Sorry.
Hi everyone. Thank you to the commission. My name is Nuriel Mogavam. I'm a resident physician at Stanford. I practice neurology. Here speaking in support of the measure. I used to be a resident of Menlo Park for about 5 years, unincorporated Menlo Park. About 2-3 months ago, I had to leave, partly because of a rent increase. But I'm actually really here to speak on behalf of my patients. Obviously, the numbers speak for themselves. The stories do here as well. Homelessness is a huge problem in our area, but also housing insecurity, being right on the margin. A number of my patients are homeless, but an even greater number are living on that margin. And I've actually come to ask almost every single one of my patients how they're doing on housing, because it really plays such an impact. Someone can look like they got their act together. People are paying 50, 60, 70% of their incomes on housing. And, you know, I get the ability to sit in a small sanctuary and talk to people honestly. The anxiety, stress, depression, marital problems that housing insecurity costs is really frightening. And, you know, when it comes to people who are also medically complex and actively trying to manage their health problems, it can be a lot at once. The benefits of this measure, to me, are just to provide a little more support and a little more stability for people who might be facing eviction. It may also just reduce these extremely high rent increases, but really what it's doing is creating a landing pad. Again, we've seen the statistics, but for people who get evicted, it's a very, very quick drop to either homelessness or rapid displacement to another community. And the rapid displacement to another community for somebody who's sick is very hard to deal with. Not only are you going to have to find a new home, I mean, that's just the beginning of it. You got to find a new job. If you're disabled or sick, that can be very hard. You're trying to take care of your family. Your kids have to find a new school district. And I think, again, we saw some statistics there, but for a child eviction, having to change your school district, your community, leave your friends, that's a traumatic experience, and that can follow with you for years. But also if you're sick, you know, we have a lot of patients who have epilepsy I take care of. And every visit, they're coming in every few weeks. We're just moving their meds around a little bit to try to reduce their seizure burden, try to make sure they don't have too many side effects. For them to move to another community and after 2-3 years have to find a new epilepsy doc, a new doctor of any kind, that's also a huge burden on them. You know, giving somebody 2-3 more months to find a place that might be closer to home, you know, within the margin what they can pay, that's a tremendous benefit to our community. To allow people who've grown up in this area to stay in this area, to follow with the doctors they have for years, stay in the same church, the same schools. The benefits of that are more than just economic. So, you know, there's been is this rent control or not? I don't know. But I think you can judge an idea on the merits. And I think this idea makes sense for Menlo Park, and I know it'll make sense for my patients. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, our next speaker, and I'm so sorry if I butcher the last name, it's Lynn Heidekalan. Thank you.
This meeting is great. I mean, a great attendance and great speakers, very passionate. I've been a Menlo Park resident for 30 years. I'm a low-income senior. My rent is 75% of my Social Security. So I am very happy to be a client of the Ecumenical Hunger Program in East Palo Alto. Let people know about them. EHP, they serve people from Menlo Park and East Palo Alto, and a lot of people who could qualify don't know that program exists. So I got a wonderful box. They're now having Trader Joe's and Sprouts of salads and sushi that they're about to throw out, so it's very nice food. I got a letter. I've been month to month for about 29 years. But I was lucky to have podiatrists who were the landlords. So the usual was it went up some in August, but nowhere, I mean, these ridiculous 300, 400. And in fact, last year they wanted to raise it 100, and I had to convince the landlord to only raise it 50 that I could afford. So I get a letter, a new management company, property management, Jason Bourne, took them over, and they're very professional. So I get this letter in the mail, and the very beginning says, you will have a rent increase, and it was like $250 for me. It was a lot, and I just go, I can't live here anymore. I'm going to be homeless. And well, fortunately, I read further down. If you wanted to stay for 2 years, they were going to give us a 2-year lease with the current rent I could afford. So I'm extremely lucky to have that opportunity and ability. But I work with the homeless, and like they said, more and more people are becoming homeless. It's just in the richest area and country in the world. This is immoral, and we need to do something about it. The ordinance, and I'm just learning about it, is like a Band-Aid. And I know people in Mountain View who are very happy with Measure V that they were able to pass. I'm not sure about these other cities, Belmont and such. The landlords tried to get on the ballot this year to repeal Measure V, and they were unsuccessful. They had paid signature gatherers, and they did not get enough signatures to overturn this fabulous, I think they call it a stabilization plan. Anyway, thanks for what you're doing. I'm glad to hear what Menlo Park is doing. So I support this because it's better than nothing. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Nina Woke.
Okay, this good? Yes. Okay, so we must be getting near the end. Nina Woke, 1211 Henderson. I'm not a landlord, I'm not a tenant. I have friends and clients who are both landlords and tenants, and some of them of both kinds are really good, and some of them are real nightmares. I'm for it. I don't think it will do all that much really to end displacement, but for the people who I sorely don't want to see pushed out, but who I don't think will be able to afford to stay in the area. At least it will give them some resources on which to locate. And that's, a mattress to land on is better than rock to land on. I think housing is a public good. It ought to be treated as a public good. And exempted from market forces as much as possible. If this is what we can do now, this is what we can do now. But I just don't expect it to do what I wish it would. I don't think I have anything to add for that. Yeah, housing's a public good, and we should find a way to realize that.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Mina Young.
My name is Mina Young. I live in San Francisco, the land with the strictest rent control you can think of, and is the most expensive place on earth. Why is that? My dad had dementia and just passed away, and I was laid off a few years ago, and right after that, my dad had his incident. I had to take care of him. I mean, we could just move him into my house and rent out the house, and I could get income. But I didn't want to, because relocation fee. In a couple of years, I would need to take it back. What I'm going to do, I have to hire a lawyer, $500 an hour. And then I hear horror stories where the tenant will delay, and the legal process will go on and on. An owner lost her house because of all the legal things that had to go into evicting a non-payment tenant. She lost her house and lost $300,000 on legal fees, still owe after she declared bankruptcy. And so now she's in welfare. That's an owner, lost her house. Okay. And my own house, I could build multiple levels. I have a single family house. It's a zoning for multiple house, units. I'm not going to build it because I have to pay more than $2 million, to build it. And then I am going to subject to rent control and can't get my place back, when my kids come back from college. Why do I do that? I don't have money, but, and I don't want to get into this kind of trouble and lose my mind, lose my house, lose my sanity. And, that's what rent control does to you. And that's why the rent is getting higher and higher in San Francisco. More than 10% of the units are not offered to rent. San Francisco has 390,000 units. 40,000 are potentially available and not rented. Menlo Park is lucky if you're maxed out in the units that you use. You just need to build because this area is flourishing with businesses. All of a sudden you have tens of thousands of employees added. And you can't build houses that fast. What do you expect? Of course, by supply demand, it's going to go up. That's just the market. And so you just deal with the market, but at least you don't have that artificial problem of rent control holding the units back that you need desperately. So resist rent control, resist that kind of relocation fee or whatever you call it. It's a scammer's heaven. Okay, that's how they do it. They use that to scam money. Some renters, they don't want to move out on their own because they know that by holding back, they can extort money from the owners. Actually, I hear that the renter told me that, oh, my friend was going to move out, but they have 4 roommates or whatever, because they know the owner was not going to keep the house for long. They want to hold it back. They want to wait for relocation fees. Okay, and they're going to delay the process, not pay the rent, and then they just delay. That's what's going on. And you know what? Owners are not made of money. My father, he could not have paid anybody for a relocation fee. When he got the house, it was $3 per hour minimum wage, and they did not have any retirement plans. The house was their retirement plan because they knew that's the surest way to keep the house, is by owning it. So they worked 3 jobs. And my parents worked 3 jobs, and when I was young, I never saw them. Weekends, they were cleaning house, they were cleaning restaurants. On weekdays, they were janitors. So during daytime, they sleep, and I went to school. I never saw them, so hardly any time with my family. That's how they were able to afford the house and to have security. So we would recommend that renters out there, you plan ahead, save for your own, and in secure house, you will appreciate it and not count on renting forever, because ownership and renting, that's the difference. When you own it, you are not subject to other factors, but also you need to work hard to keep your mortgage because you are renting you're renting from the banker for a long time. Okay, you can't make the mortgage, you will lose it. So renters and owners are the same people. We just look at how we plan ahead and how we deal with it. So please do not take these baits. It's a temptation that's going to hurt you a lot in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Wendy Wong.
Good evening, everybody. We're all tired. I'm also coming from San Francisco. Why am I here? I'm here because I know rent control is going to hurt everybody, not only landlord who is not going to make money or greedy income, they will hurt tenants in the long term. The tenants' children need to stay in the city, but because of the shortage of housing, they are not able to stay. Maybe the parents were forced to leave. Now, housing shortage, we heard the guests saying that it causes also homeless. Look at San Francisco. Do we have improvement on homeless issue in San Francisco? No. How many percentage of homeless that we have in San Francisco that are not our San Franciscan residents? About over 65% of people on the street, they are either drug addicts or they are coming from outside. Now, don't make mistake that I am accusing people who are drug addicts on the street. But look at San Francisco. We have decades of rent control. Have we seen any improvement in San Francisco? No. We have observed a lot of divisive between people. Landlords are trying to protect themselves from being sued. Tenants are afraid that they are being evicted. Those tenseness between each other, it creates the sharp impact of each other. It's not a harmonious place to live. I'm very proud to be San Franciscan, but I see the street filthy. I see people who doesn't have home to live. That is all the big consequences of shortages of housing. When we're talking about entitlement, this is the beginning of having the relocation fee. We have legal contract, we follow the contract. 2-year lease, yes, 2-year lease. And if this is like consumer price index increase, that we just, increase the rent based on that index. It's all black and white. Why do we have relocation fee? When we have enough notice, 30 days, 60 days, that also causes the tremendous of stressful to all people. And when we talk about entitlement, we have a lot of attorneys in San Francisco. They are just flipped the property owner's name, and they want to find out who can be sued. And yes, one of the guests talked about race. I understand that also Chinese owners were targeted of suing them to get huge amount. We are talking minimum $150,000 if tenant would just ask, okay, the lease is due, so we want to take the property back. And that could be the wrongful eviction right then, $150,000. Now we're talking about entitlement. When people try to make the excuses to sue people, we got the attorneys, the greedy attorneys, who are helping them to get rich. We don't hear a lot about the small property owners being sued because the newspaper would not tell you a lot of those sad stories that land property owners, mom and pop property owners, were sued that they lost their lives. Sometimes they're so stressful, their brain would drain down that they could not bear it anymore. Now, those information, those stories, you will not hear it. Politically correct, they always report something that is a majority that want to gain the support from the public. I have to tell you that when we have those costs that is not supposed to be in the list, then we become greedy, then we are ready to fight. I am not here to tell you that tenants are bad, landlords are good. I'm not here to say that. I'm coming from San Francisco Coalition for Good Neighborhoods. I heard both ends. My also comment was, yes, one of the guests said that this is overcrowded. Now, that is also caused by the shortage of housing. When we have a house, single-family home, we want to take it back. We want to live in there because I'm being relocated. 2 years later, I want to take the property back. No, you have to pay me relocation fee. You ask me to leave, I'm going to sue you for wrongful eviction. Why am I renting my place for 2 years that will help the housing supply? I'm not going to rent it out because I will be sued, and all my income will not be compensating all the legal matters and charges that I pay. Now imagine that if someone trying to get money from that rental, but they would not get their income, yet they are sued, and they become negative network. When we have also this entitlement, we also have protected tenants, 65 years old, they live there, and if you ask them to vacate the place, those older or maybe protected group will get huge compensation. When the huge compensation come, as a landlord, as a property owner, you don't mean to screen them out. But my friend, 65 years old, she's not able to rent a place in San Francisco. Why? That is good intention, bad result. You want to protect them, and they become not wanted tenants. So don't go into that route. Relocation fee, the compensation fee, whatever the fee that costs is a rent control. That is step one. If the voters say no, just stick with it. My solution for the housing crisis is to get more housing available. Provide incentive program for landlord to rent. The developer needs to get involved. I'm not a developer, but I know when we have more supply, we have rent, we have rental market available out there. So I hope that my sharing information, the horrible story that you hear from me, is only part of it. We will hear more. We don't hear San Francisco improving the housing. That has been exercising decades. It's not going anywhere. So I would like to conclude that we have very good intention to help each other, but we do not want to have the entitlement of something that you are in the contract. This is not a communist country that you take the hardworking people's wealth to give it to the poor. And the city is responsible to do this balance and providing more housing. And otherwise, no one wants to improve or develop any housing in San Francisco. Prop 10 is the one that really discouraging the developer coming to San Francisco, to California, to build more housing, because there's no incentive. So you don't punish people to do good things.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Penelope Huang.
Does this go up? Or I have to go? Hi, I'm Penelope Huang, and I'm a local real estate broker with Golden Gate Sotheby's International Realty. And so I just wanted to address the other side of the ordinance. And I want to also address, just reflect what the young gentleman from the California Apartment Association said, that the City Council gave very limited scope to study relocation assistance only. And while I am listening to the stories here, and I understand that there are people who are displaced and in a bad situation, that this ordinance goes way beyond the scope that was issued by the City Council. And so it is rent control in disguise, and it also is a just cause component, which was not part of the discussion. And it also, if it includes single-family homes, very likely will violate the state law. So I hear what is being proposed, and it's very admirable of the Housing Commission to come forward to try and solve a problem, but it's not within the scope of what they were directed to do. So I just, as I was listening, there was a couple of things I made notes of. And the pastor here very eloquently said that in 1985, EPA instituted rent control and claimed it as a success. And I would say, I don't think that was a success when you look at East Palo Alto as a community within the rest of the peninsula. The Ravenswood School District comes out as a result of the rent control which is applied in East Palo Alto, because property taxes are what forms the basis of your school districts. And when there's no increase in property taxes, there's no increase in money to go to the schools. And the discrepancy between the Menlo Park City School District and the Ravenswood School District is evident to all of us. I live in Menlo Park. I live in the Willows, just on the other side of the freeway. And when my husband bought our house, we were in the Ravenswood School District. It turns out we've been there 40 years. And so when you look at how those two school districts have gone, it's very much based on the property tax and the value of the homes. And because East Palo Alto has no property tax base, the result is that the school district is the way it is today. And that's a harsh reality, but it's the truth. And East Palo Alto had the dubious honor of being the murder capital of the United States in 1992. Rent control brings blight, it brings depression, it brings crime. Those things, if you just take one little study of East Palo Alto with the rent control ordinance that it has, that is the result that you have today. Now, the East Palo Alto rent control and just cause ordinance is it's It's living proof of what happened. And I can tell you as a realtor, I had a listing in East Palo Alto. And the only way we could sell it was with the tenant in place. And we couldn't sell it with the tenant in place because my owner, who had had that property 30 plus years, the rent was $700 a month. That's where it had been for a long time. It couldn't be raised. He wasn't going to move back in and live there because he was living somewhere else. He didn't have an immediate family member who was going to move in. We could only sell it to another investor, and we couldn't find an investor because over the course of time the house had become so run down because he had no money to fix it up because he didn't have any rent coming in from it, but he still had to make the property taxes, he still had to make the insurance. So eventually we offered it to the tenant, and we went out to try to find financing to put it together to see how we could get this tenant to buy the house. She's been there 27 years, okay? And she said, oh, I don't need financing, I have cash. Because all the time she's had her low rent, she's been saving, and she bought this house for cash from my landlord who was barely making it, okay? This is a true life example. And I know you guys have true life examples too, but there is two sides to every story. And that's what the young gentleman at the back was trying to say. There's no protection here. What if there was a major earthquake and everyone moved out of California and all of these homes were damaged in the earthquake? Would the city of Menlo Park be saying, oh, let me write you a check to fix the house up? No, there wouldn't be any of that coming. There's two sides to every story. And one of the ladies from San Francisco said, housing does not get built in cities where there's rent control. And that is true. Developers, if they have a choice, will not buy. Well, right now with Costa-Hawkins, they can build new housing because it can't be subject to rent control. But if they feel there's going to be rent control across the board, they will not build because they won't invest, because they can't keep the properties the way they are when they are brand new. It's a supply and demand thing. And if Menlo Park wants to fix the problem, and we told them many times, they need to build more housing. There has to be a greater supply of housing. More housing fixes the problem, not less. Okay? The city is sitting on a pot of money for below market housing. They take a piece from every single development and they put it in this fund. It's millions of dollars. The city of Menlo Park could take that money and build low-income housing. They could build apartment buildings. There's plenty of spaces where they've identified where they can do that, okay? But when anybody wants to build any kind of low-income housing or affordable housing, everyone says, I don't want it in my neighborhood. Even in Bellhaven here, when it was proposed, the neighbors said, we don't want it here in our neighborhood, put it in West Menlo. Okay, do you want it or don't you want it, right? Okay, you gotta decide what you really want and how you're going to achieve it. So, let's talk about the this is rent control, even in disguise, and it's not within the purview of what the Housing Commission was tasked to do. And rent control limits diversity, which is the opposite of what I'm hearing from everybody. It limits diversity. The person who is in a rent-controlled unit will stay in that rent-controlled unit. You heard the ladies from San Francisco say the same thing. It passes from person to person. There's ways to get around it. There are people from Google in rent-controlled housing in San Francisco that are earning $250,000 a year. Okay? That's the unintended consequence of rent control. Because once you're there, you're there. So imagine if everybody in Menlo Park who's currently in their home, it forces them to stay in their home. They can't move because they're in a rent-controlled unit, so they don't ever get ahead. They don't move, the house doesn't get fixed. It's a no-win for everybody. The times when homes get fixed are when the tenant is gone. And I can tell you, I do property management. It costs a landlord to take a home which has been lived in for a long time $10,000 to $15,000 just to do paint, carpet, change out some light fixtures, maybe the door handles, and refresh the landscaping. That's a $15,000 burden to turn the home for the next tenant. And then that money has to be recovered from somewhere. And when landlords decide they're going to actually have the money to upgrade their units or upgrade their buildings, then they have to put that money in, then they have to charge more. Not because they're greedy landlords, because they have to offset the cost that it costs them to bring the building up to the par that everybody wants. And I heard somebody say that if tenants get evicted so that landlords can improve the building. Well,
excuse me, I'm sorry. Do you mind just finishing up with the comments that it's just due to the lateness of the hour, I want to make sure everybody has a chance. So I want to hear everything you have to say, but could you just take a couple more minutes and wrap up, please?
Okay, so what I was going to say is if you don't evict tenants so that you can increase the property and fix the property, what are you left with? Run-down properties, lots of them. And then you get blight. And with that comes the crime and the other things that I talked about in the beginning. And that's not what anybody wants. That's not what tenants want either. Tenants want to live in a safe neighborhood. But a safe neighborhood requires that money gets put into the property, and it has to come from somewhere. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. So we're going to take a 5-minute quick break. I'm going to ask that if anyone else has any cards to that they'd like to talk, that they give them to me now, and then we're going to cut off the comment period. It's getting late, and I would love to ask that everyone, if just to try to keep their comments as concise as possible, that would be super appreciated. So I'm going to adjourn for 5 minutes so people can use the bathroom or whatever. Get me any final cards, because we really want to hear what everyone has to say, and then we'll start up in 5 minutes. Thank you.
I see the Housing Commission, as being the experts in this area, not the City Council, and not any other department. And all of us speak from the place that we come from. One of the things I learned about being a landlord is that one of my tenants never complained about anything. And I found out later the reason they never complained about anything is because they were afraid of their rent going up. So there needs to be an understanding of what a tenant is like. I have another tenant who will complain about the time of day. So, you know, that's one end of the spectrum to the other. The most important piece is that I don't believe that this would be fast forwarding if it wasn't for the investors who have come into my neighborhood, the Bellhaven neighborhood, and that bought up property on Pierce Road, increased the rent substantially with the design of getting those people out. A lot of the housing that I've seen on my block, that's exactly what's happened, is that we have, between having realtors knocking on my door trying to get me to sell my home, between having realtors send me letters, between having leaving letters, information on my door about how much my house is worth, really encouraging me to sell my house for substantially more than I could ever sell it, to be very honest. I couldn't sell it for what they're saying it's worth. And that is by design to get investors to buy the property, and then if they rent it, which they probably will, they're going to rent it for a substantial amount of money. I'm retired, and I could not afford to live in my home. I'm retired, and so this policy would ensure that if I did have to rent somewhere, that I would come into that level of the market in which I would at least be able to get some help to move on. The reality is, I know from the renters that I've had, is that most of them are making ends meet, and a lot of times the ends don't even wave at each other. And so to be able to save up enough money, that rainy day fund, which I was raised with, the rainy day fund should be a minimum of 3 months, ideally 6. For many people, that's absolutely impossible. And it's not because they're not trying, but it's because that's the circumstances. I appreciate that there are tenants that are the tenants from you-know-where. And, but then there's also the landlords from you-know-where. So I really encourage you to support the housing displacement policy. They may need to tweak after they listen to what people are saying this evening. They got this far because they listened to the people that came to the housing meetings, housing commission meetings. I also strongly encourage you to come to the housing commission meetings because that's where all of this begins. And then you can help them have the most dynamic and robust policy that is sent to the City Council for them to adopt as an ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Fatima Han. Fatima? Okay, I'll circle back at the end and see if she's, in case she stepped out. Okay, our next speaker is Daniel Valverde.
Thank you, commissioners and audience. My name is Daniel Valverde, and I work for the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County. We're a nonprofit that works with communities and their leaders to create and preserve quality, affordable homes. I'm here to stand tonight stating that our organization fully supports the ordinance that the Housing Commission has proposed. The supply issue, there's definitely an issue there, but also with the high cost of rent of the region right now, I think it's imperative that we help renters in the area, especially with the strong demand of housing that has generated a lot of the jobs. 80,000 jobs has been created since 2010, and very little has been built, approximately between 4,000 to 5,000 units. That's a 19-to-1 ratio. So it's important that we support renters in the strong demand for housing when there's not enough supply. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Stephen Jackson.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Jackson. I am a real estate agent as well as a long-term resident of Menlo Park. I grew up here. My family's grown up here. I know there was a lady who spoke earlier about EHP. That is actually my family's organization over in East Palo Alto. The reason why I'm here tonight really was to come and check out and see what the residents had to say in regards to what I've seen. I can't talk from the statistics that we've been hearing and whatnot, but I can talk from experience. I've seen a lot of my family, friends, people that have known long-term displaced by the current growth, the significant growth that we've seen over the last probably 4 to 5 years. Some of this is just the market turning. Some of it is the new tech influence. But I think that this measure stands in good regards of doing something like the I think it was the pastor who stated, kind of putting a Band-Aid over things, maybe like a bullet hole, right? But it's something. I mean, we're looking at, from what I'm seeing, I'm watching people bleed out. And when I say bleed out, I mean by having to be relocated, leaving not only their family, their communities behind, but all of their resources. I can imagine, because a lot of the people that I know are elderly, or they tend to be minorities. I've heard a lot here tonight, which I don't quite agree with. I understand that there are more than one side of the coin, but I think that some of it went a little too far tonight with the, how can I put it, the connotations that were put on things in regards to race or social status, and how that was pushed towards rent control. I think that
really the rent control is there for the people who need it. So regardless of your race, your social status, creed, I think if there's a need, we need to make sure that we're fulfilling that need. And I think it's very apparent from the voices that we've heard tonight. We've heard a huge amount of support for this measure. Yes, we have heard opposite of that, but I think that I can understand from a landlord's point of view, but I more understand from a tenant's point of view, understanding that we live in one of the most expensive places to live in the country. Rents have more than quadrupled. I've heard plenty of stories, even in the newspaper, of workers that work at different tech companies and they can't afford to do anything than other rent out, say, a garage from a person, and they're packed in there with their children. I don't think that's the type of community that we want to represent. And so I would say that I am in support of this measure, and I hope that the Housing Commission takes that into effect. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Martel Arroyo Lopez. Oh, okay. Martel Lopez? Okay. Cecilia Taylor.
I can literally say good night, everyone. It's almost 9 o'clock. Cecilia Taylor, I'm a resident in Menlo Park. I live in the Bellhaven neighborhood, and I wish that everyone was still here. There are some facts that need to be talked about when it comes to the city of Menlo Park and the Housing Commission, and I commend you for all the work that you've been doing. The Housing Commission was not as robust as it is today, and I appreciate all the work that they've done just in the past year. One, expanding the number of housing commissioners, and two, the number of meetings that they have, once a month now. So there's 12 meetings a month. So that way it gives time to actually think about and address the problems that we're having in Menlo Park when it comes to housing. Some things that came up for me this evening just by listening to all of the long speakers that were here. One is we do have a 3-minute limit, and so we all need to respect that. Relationships, community, and quality of life. In order for everyone to live, we need to build a relationship. And when we think about where we live, we need to have a good relationship with our tenants and our landlords and our neighbors. And in order to do that, we need to be realistic about what people are experiencing. Here in this neighborhood specifically, we've been experiencing predatory and discriminatory lending, especially on our seniors. We have high rent increases, and also we have low wages. And when you put those factors together in a community like this, you wind up with gentrification. So there are some things that need to be dealt with the city of Menlo Park and our housing and what we need to do. We also need to define affordable housing. What does that mean to our city? We also need to think about having broader discussions, even though it makes people feel uncomfortable when it comes to race, because these are facts about this community where I grew up. It doesn't look like, as far as the people that live here, as far as where I grew up. And it's not that I want it to go back. I want people to respect and preserve the community that exists today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to do one last call out for the two people that I called earlier who didn't respond. So the first one was Fatima Han. Okay. And Martel Lopez. Okay. And then actually, I'm so sorry, I missed this other one. So Nina Woke. This is our last speaker.
Still Nina Woke. It occurred to me, I am tired of hearing rent control blamed for the way Americans sue each other. Whether there's rent control or not, landlords or tenants going to use whatever laws there are to sue each other. You go to the San Mateo courts and just sit there, and despite the fact there's no rent control in the whole county outside East Palo Alto, they're in there suing and counter-suing. So, no, it is not rent control's fault. Rent control might level the playing field a little, but the game's going to go on. And the second thing, one of our long-winded speakers did say that I thought was real good to hear was, yeah, Menlo Park has a lot of money in its affordable housing fund, and it couldn't hurt for the Housing Commission to subtly hint to City Council that maybe they could spend some of that building some housing. That would make me very happy.
Thank you. So I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight. I know it's a big ask at the end of a workday, so thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for sharing all of your comments. We are going to have another meeting over at the City Council chambers tomorrow night, so if you have anything else you'd like to share, please feel free to come. The plan, as I understand it, is we will then have some final discussions on this, any final changes or tweaks that we'd like to potentially make to the proposed ordinance at our October 10th meeting. But in the meantime, we still want to hear comments. We're still wanting to make this most strongest, ordinance that it can be in terms of something that's supported by the entire community. So if you have any questions, you can always send emails to staff, Clay or Michael, or you can contact us at the Housing Commission. Our contact information's on the website. I think that is it. Thank you so. Yeah. Oh yeah. So I don't know if you know this, but you can comment via email, or you can write a letter, regular letter, but most people just do email, or you can come to another meeting. This is an official Housing Commission meeting, so we have some other business we're going to do, but you don't need to stay for that. So, and then I just want to make sure that is there any other comments that you guys would like to share? Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. Okay. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is actually an update on the release of the NOFA. Do I need to still use this?
I do. I mean, yeah. We're gonna continue the meeting. So, regarding the NOFA, attached is a somewhat clean version of the draft that the committee provided to staff. This is still not the final version, but it is a kind of updated, clean version. Originally, we were going to work hard to get this on the City Council agenda for next week. That meeting has been canceled, so it will not be going to City Council until October 9th. But there were some unanswered outstanding questions from the subcommittee that we will be working on and addressing before that happens. So I expect that will be in the staff report presented to the council on October 9th, unless we are forced to push it to October 23rd, but I'm aiming for October 9th at the moment.
Okay, so I'm sorry, it could just because it's getting late, but you're saying that, is this the draft that would then go to the council? I'm sorry, I'm not quite following the, okay.
So this version is going to be reformatted into kind of a new look and feel, and we will try to address any of the questions from the subcommittee that were in there, but those have not been incorporated yet. So some of the language you'll see, if it was straightforward, is incorporated, but if there were questions that didn't necessarily include recommended language, it was just question, can we do this, should we do this, that has not been reflected yet, but will likely be in the next version.
Okay, so does that mean then that we will then see that at the October meeting of the Housing Commission so that it's finalized before it goes to council?
If you want to see it again for the October 10th meeting, then it wouldn't go to council until October 23rd, but that's possible.
So do we have a path to approve this tonight so that it can go to City Council on October 9th? Or do we have to wait until the changes are done before we vote to send it to City Council?
that all depends on whether you want to see it again or whether you want to address those at the council meeting. But if you want to see it again, then you will see it on October 10th, and it will go to council on October 23rd.
There are just two things that I didn't see in here, and I'm wondering, they don't necessarily need to be addressed in the NOFA itself, but I think it would be helpful when it goes to the City Council that we provide a little bit of context. These are things that I've been tracking for a long time. One of them is the intention that this will come out annually, and that you could theoretically expect that if you were unable to put in an application January 31st of 2019, that January 31st of 2020, there would be another shot, because housing's hard. It's hard to kind of lock up all the pieces that you want. And so sending this out, there may be a few applicants who are ready, but I would love to send the message that Menlo Park is open for business for proposals, and the way that you do that is by certainty. So it really needs to go a little bit further, at least if we could set some intention with the City Council that this would be annually. And then I seem to remember that there is something in the settlement statement related to when the housing element was fast-tracked that speaks to really having regularity. So I don't know I don't remember the details on that, but if we could refresh everyone's memory as to why this is really something that should happen, this quarter, that it shouldn't slip till next year, even if the agendas get full, going up to the holidays and what have you, new mayor selection, goal setting, etc. I really don't want to see this slip.
Yes, this is supposed to be regular. It was supposed to be done in 2017. Here we are in 2018. I don't know what the reason was for that previous delay. The only thing I noticed was that typically it's open for a 90-day period. So if we open it in October, that's November, December, January. That's a 90-day period of being open. But we are late, and it is meant to be every other year, I believe, not annually.
Okay. I would just note that best practices in the county, Redwood City, our neighbors, it's annually.
Okay.
So that's...
But I think our settlement agreement is every other year, but I'm not positive.
We could encourage the council to do
Yeah.
better by trying to ask if it's something that they like staff to do annually. And I mean, that's definitely my professional opinion if we want to, because you're going to miss people this year, and so why not give them a chance next year?
Yeah, and I don't see any reason not to do it on that schedule. I mean, as long as we have money to give, we should be providing ample opportunities to use that money. So.
And I think that this is actually really important also because of the talk about the county wanting to access some of our funds and put that money out to other places in the county. So I want to echo what Nevada just said. I think if there's any way we can frame this to make sure that the council knows that we think it should be a predictable time every year, I think that it becomes an issue of certainty for developers who are trying to develop projects. So I think that would be an excellent thing to add to our presentation to council around this, that this is something that we don't want to slip. And the reason it slipped is because I think it's just workload, and I think we just it needs to be understood that this happens every year. Because now we have this huge amount of money built up, and now we've got the county saying, hey, we'd love to use some of that money. And I'm like, no, like we want it for Menlo Park. So
you're the committee. So what are you comfortable sending this to City Council as is?
So the reason I brought this up is we did this months ago, and I didn't get to see a red line of this, so I can't remember some of the questions that I had, and so I don't want to hold things up, but I
have a suggestion. Just like we did with tenant relocation assistance, can we give you our blessing to make that call after you've had a chance to read the final version?
That works fine for me.
Okay.
But does that work okay? The timing? Okay. Sounds great.
So-
But I want to make sure there's no other comments from you guys around any other things that you'd like to see added to this or changed or anything that
Well, I
was...
have a question. Michelle had some concerns about making sure this was inclusive of local developers who may or may not have an extensive history. And I think I saw some language in there that shows that you took that into consideration, but I just wanted to ask you about that.
I think we did in terms of the experience, but I'd have to go back and look.
What we had discussed was that you could compose a development team through consultants, and I see that the development team has demonstrated experience with successful affordable housing projects. So it to me looks like you have the flexibility to do that through hiring somebody, even if you don't have a completed project or something like that.
Okay, so there actually was one other issue that actually I wanted to bring up on this that did jump out at me. We had shown that we wanted to prioritize projects that were going to be developed in Central or West Menlo Park, and I'll be honest with you, I'm a little freaked out about this idea of some of this money being lent out to the county, and I'm worried that if for some reason we don't get any projects in that area, that then we're not going to be, potentially that's going to hamstring us in terms of not being able to get the money out on the street.
In reading this, though, being you can be a priority, but you
Right,
could
so I
also
was wondering if we should change the language to say because I think I have to find it. I think we said just those projects. I don't think we said priority exactly, and so I want to make sure that that gives us flexibility to look at deals that.
It looks like you would just assign it
No,
a
somewhere.
higher rank.
Oh, the project is in, yeah, prioritize this, but make sure, okay, that eligible, okay.
But it's
Okay.
a good point. I mean, if it meets threshold, you should be able to look at any project, even if it isn't a priority.
Okay, so I'll go ahead, I'll look at the red line, I'll make sure I have no other questions or clarity, get back to Clay on that, and then the idea being that it will be good to go. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, but do we need to vote to approve your final version? Isn't that what we did with the tier? Well, Clay, tell us. Yeah.
Again, that's your prerogative. You can, or you can delegate that to the subcommittee.
And we don't need to vote to delegate?
You can hold a vote now or by consensus.
Why don't we go ahead and...
I move that we delegate the recommendation on this to Meg, who's the committee.
I'd like to second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, great. All right. Okay, so the next item is to discuss and recommend any future agenda items, and so this would be a chance for any commissioner to go ahead and bring up any issue that you all have been wanting to discuss or bring up in future meetings. So I open it up to you all. Do you have any? I know we have plenty of other things that we're working on, but I think it's always good to be. Yep. And do you want to? Sounds like you have some ideas. Let's hear from the commissioners first, and then you can go ahead. Okay.
So, well, I think it's already been suggested, and I think we're sort of planning on having a study session on fees. Is that, or at least a discussion? I don't know.
Anybody else?
Well, I just put this out there as a suggestion. Maybe we could also have a discussion on anti-displacement measures, possibilities. I mean, the anti-displacement committee, I don't know if it's time for updates, but we did have a meeting, and there's just, there's a lot of writing and white papers and ideas out there. So there's a lot to discuss.
Okay, just looking ahead to the list that I'm tracking, we anticipate that the item you discussed at the last meeting about 975 Florence Avenue, or Florence Lane, the one that was a condo conversion in addition of a BMR unit, That project, my understanding, is being changed due to some of the feedback from speakers and some of the architects' ideas. So I anticipate that will come back to you for a redo, basically, either at the October 9th or the November 13th meeting, or whatever the November date is. Also, for November, we will probably be tasked with having a hearing to discuss the San Mateo County Civil Grand Jury report dealing with anti-smoking or no smoking in multifamily housing. One of the recommendations of the Civil Grand Jury was for cities and communities to hold meetings to discuss, is this a big issue? Do we need to consider ordinances that would restrict smoking in these type of housing units? So I think that will likely come back to us in November, and we are tasked with holding a certain number of public meetings before the end of the year. So the direction I'm hearing right now from the city manager and the mayor is that that would likely be the first meeting would be at a housing commission meeting in November. November 14th.
So I'm going to go ahead and keep these on my list, and when we do agenda setting for the next couple meetings, we'll talk about that with Clay and Nevada. That's on our list, which sounds great. Okay. So any reports and announcements? Is that for you, Clay, or for anybody here? Because I know we have staff updates and announcement at the end. I don't know if that's different. Oh, should I just go into the subcommittees? Okay. All right, so subcommittee reports. Anti-displacement subcommittee.
Well, we met, and I sort of got an update from Nevada because she's been on the commission longer than Rachel and I. And
I think we are at this point, just trying to get our arms around various things out there to kind of figure out if we were to try to push on one lever, would it have the intended effect? So doing some research there and wanting to probably eventually have some kind of a forum where we could have a little bit more input as to who is being impacted most in this community, and if there's anything that we can do to look at that. But I'd say we're just in the kind of first steps there, and hopefully we can meet again before our next meeting. And in terms of housing policy, since I'm the only one there, we have not met this past month, but we will update next meeting.
Yeah, for below market rate, we are meeting with Josh Abrams from 21 Elements to get his input on in lieu fees and how to give developers clarity and predictability on that. So we'll have something more, and then we have a meeting on the calendar with staff to discuss some other sort of formatting and clarifying, and one more policy item on displaced residents, because we sort of limited it to people who were actually living here in 2008 and were displaced, and we left out people who moved here in 2009 and then were displaced, so we need to fix that. So that'll be in the next version as well.
Okay, so I'll do the next two. So I'm going to skip down to the NOFA committee. We've already talked about that. Then the marketing subcommittee, Rachel and I met a couple weeks ago and started throwing ideas around in terms of priorities and things we wanted to talk about. We're excuse me, and then we're in the process of trying to schedule a meeting with Clay to kind of get the ball rolling and talk about any ideas he has as well. So we're in process. Okay, commissioner reports. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share? Yes, Karen.
Well, I want to say that Meg did a really, really good report at the city council meeting, and the city council was very appreciative. And I also want to thank Michelle for really kicking this commission into gear when she was on it and when she was chair, and not to take away from your wonderful presentation, but I'm sure you share that. And yeah, I mean, like what Pam Jones said today. So shout out to Michelle and to you. It was a really great report.
So this month, September 21st, is the NPH conference in San Francisco that I will be attending and I believe presenting on a esoteric topic related to resident feedback in the design process. This is what happens when you go on maternity leave. So that's happening on the 21st. I'll be excited to share anything that I hear when we see each other again, and also I think there's probably some opportunities to attend the conference if anyone is available on the 21st. So I wanted to bring that up. And then next month we're looking at Housing Leadership Day. Do you have the date handy? I have Daniel's no longer here, of course. But Clay, is it the intention that the city would pay for any commissioners who wanted to go? So, and
Yeah, I'll be going for sure.
And can we nicely invite the council to come as well? I mean, certainly for the morning session, it's that's when you have the majority of electeds, and it's normally very high representation of elected folks. So it would be great for the council to designate at least one person to go there, given that there seems to be a little bit of pride that Menlo Park has produced a lot of the housing in the county, period. So we should be there.
There is also Matt Desmond, who wrote the book Evicted, is going to be speaking at the Habitat for Humanity breakfast soon. Yeah. I'm looking. Yeah. I think that would be a good one. I feel like there was something else too, but it's eluding me right now.
Okay. So Clay, I think you're up. Clay, you're up if for any staff updates.
Okay, very briefly, it was last month, I believe, or yeah, I think it was August 28th, or that the City Council again made further changes to the salary schedule and job description or job titles. So they're going to go back out to recruit for a Deputy Community Development Director for Housing would be the title that they're going to try to recruit for the permanent manager position. It would be housing focused, and the economic development tasks of the role would probably get reassigned to other parts of the city so that this person could focus on housing. The 2 management analyst positions in housing and economic development, that recruitment is ongoing. They just completed the testing portion this week. So I think there was over 90 applicants total, but we have 2 openings. So this was the screening, and then that'll form an eligibility list, and the city will then proceed with typically panel interviews and finalists and whatnot. So I don't have an idea yet of when the final people will be in place, but we are continuing that process. You may have heard there's been other staffing changes. We lost the transportation manager, Nikki Nagaya, is no longer with the city. She went to SF Muni. The city engineer has recently announced she has left. She's going to the city of San Mateo. And more challenges, more changes to come probably in the next month, so stay tuned.
What does that mean?
No, I mean, we are continuing to adjust in the organization. The city council last night got a look at the work plan which had about 60 items, 6 of them being the very top priorities. So a number of the items were placed on hold. A lot of the public works stuff is kind of being reprioritized as we speak. They've brought on a couple of retired public works directors to help fill in some of the gap on some of the project management items, but we're very much an organization in transition right now. I think that's it, unless you have any questions.
Okay, I think we can adjourn. Thank you, Clay, for organizing this. I think it went really well tonight. Thanks, everybody, for being really patient and open and listening. So thank you. All right, we're adjourned.